Why did the Dutch Economic Affairs Minister cancel his trip to China? Who is the real loser in this farce? A European nation, which holds a critical position in the global chip industry chain, just used an administrative order to forcefully seize a core asset from a Chinese company. Then, in a sudden pivot, it scrapped a pre-scheduled, proactively determined consultation trip to China as if it were waste paper. This move by the Dutch Minister of Economic Affairs, Micky Adriaansens, has ignited the global business discussion forums. Just on November 19th, the minister had issued a high-profile statement on the social platform X, declaring his talks with the Chinese side extremely constructive, and describing the temporary suspension of Dutch intervention in Nexperia, Anshi Semiconductor, as a sign of goodwill. Yet, in less than 2 weeks, the attitude performed a complete 180-degree turn. The so-called scheduling conflict was deemed tenuous, even by the Netherlands-owned De Telegraaf newspaper, clearly hiding a major secret that could shake the global automotive chip supply chain. Some might wonder, how important is Nexperia that the Dutch government would risk a major diplomatic row to seize it? Simply put, it's the universal screw of the auto chip world. While not dealing with the most cutting-edge 7nm chips, 1 in every 2 cars globally uses its products. Just as your refrigerator doesn't need rocket science but can't run without a compressor, giants like BMW and Volkswagen would have their production lines halted without Nexperia's components. More mind-boggling than the asset grab itself is that the Netherlands' calculating maneuver of forcible acquisition has not yielded any benefit. Instead, it has put itself in the global supply chain hot seat, becoming a universally criticized hot potato. Let's look at some painful data. Nexperia ships over 100 billion chips annually. What does that mean? It means 1 in every 7 people globally is directly or indirectly using its products. More crucially, its supply chain is deeply bound to China. 70% of the chips must first be sent to China for crucial packaging and testing by companies like JCT and Tongfu Microelectronics. This step is entirely irreplaceable in the Netherlands. Once processed, they are sold globally. The moment the Netherlands intervened, Nexperia's production base in Hamburg, Germany, immediately stalled. 8 billion chips piled up in the warehouse, unable to be shipped, and workers were put on rotation. U.S. giants like General Motors and Ford panicked, holding $2.3 billion in orders that couldn't be fulfilled, with Ford's Michigan plant directly announcing a 30% reduction in production. Even the usually compromising European Union grew anxious. The industry committee issued 2 warning letters in late November, stating plainly that the recklessness of the Netherlands is costing the European automotive industry €420 million every day. What completely blindsided the Netherlands was the US suddenly pausing relevant sanction rules targeting auto chips. The Netherlands had been following US security policy, as a shield. Now that the US has relaxed its stance, the pretext of hiding behind a big banner has been utterly shattered. Next, let's dissect the Netherlands' misguided plan. How did its disruptive asset grab trigger a global supply chain earthquake? What roles did the US and the EU play? After reading this, you will understand who the real loser is in this farce. Performing arts a crisis of responsibility, the true reason behind the cancelled trip. The reason Micky Adriaansens gave for cancelling his China visit is one that even the Dutch themselves don't believe. He cited a scheduling conflict in his letter to the parliament, but everyone knows the parliamentary debate on Nexperia was scheduled before his original China trip. Simply put, the domestic criticism was so overwhelming that he had to return to put out the fire. The Dutch media outlet NU.nl directly called it out. His intervention has caused a diplomatic dispute, and MPs blasted him for acting without consulting the Chinese side. A clear image of a flustered official causing a mess and seeking cover. This is reminiscent of the US drama suppressing Huawei. The US initially banned chip sales citing national security, only to discover that its own Department of Defense overseas bases relied on Huawei equipment for communications, forcing them to quickly add exemption clauses. Columbia University economist Jeffrey Sachs criticized it harshly. Only thinking about containing China, without counting their own costs. The Netherlands' current predicament is even more ludicrous. The US at least tried to compensate, while Minister Adriaansens can only stubbornly claim it concerns national security, before immediately shifting decision-making responsibility to the Prime Minister and his colleagues. Even allies admitted that they were only notified after the action was taken to the UK, US, and China. This is not the conduct of a major nation, it's the action of a street thug. Commentary: the Netherlands' scheduling conflict is essentially a responsibility conflict. It wants to please the US with a security card, but fears offending China and losing commercial interests, and it certainly doesn't dare face the wrath of domestic businesses. This opportunistic, fence-sitting behavior is more embarrassing than choosing a side directly. The lesson from the US crackdown on Huawei is clear: in the era of globalization, using political means to interfere with business operations will eventually be subject to market backlash. Adriaansens, who doesn't even understand the basic logic of consult first, then act, will only further damage the Netherlands' international credibility. Collision self-inflicted wound: how the grab undermined Europe's supply chain. The Netherlands' move to seize Nexperia is a textbook case of penny wise, pound foolish. The company, wholly acquired by Wingitech Technology, had revenues of $14.7 billion in 2024. While not top tier, its chips are the lifeline of the automotive industry. They are mainly produced in Hamburg, Germany, shipped to China for packaging, and then sold to global automakers. The Netherlands secretly issued the takeover order on September 30th and only dared to make it public on October 12th. The result was an immediate crisis. BMW's Munich plant cut production by 20%, Volkswagen's Wolfsburg plant was shut down entirely, and the US's Ford urgently placed additional chip orders in China, in contrast to the EU's persistent calls for supply chain autonomy. This operation is an act of self-sabotage. The EU had just introduced the Critical Raw Materials Act to secure supply, and the Netherlands personally punctured a hole in its own industrial chain. Germany's Der Spiegel clearly saw it. Europe is always one step too slow in key areas. The US knows how to use the Defense Production Act to secure resources, yet the Netherlands is dismantling its own allies' infrastructure. More ironically, Nexperia's chips are not sensitive technology. The Netherlands forcibly imposed the national security label, which was deemed absurd even by the US, leading it to pause the relevant sanction rules and completely shatter the Dutch pretext. Commentary: the Netherlands' short-sightedness lies in treating Nexperia as a geopolitical bargaining chip, forgetting that it is a hub of the global supply chain. 70% of its packaging relies on China, and global automakers depend on its supply. Can such a tight industrial link be severed by a single administrative order? While the EU aims to compete with the US for critical resources, the Netherlands is dragging its feet, not only causing losses for German automakers but also making a mockery of the EU's autonomy strategy. It's easy to disrupt the supply chain, but rebuilding trust will be far more difficult. Bomb the unraveling plot. Who will be thrown under the bus? The Dutch government's constant flip-flopping has permanently etched the word hypocrisy on its forehead. November 13th, Adriaansens stubbornly insisted, "I would do it again." November 19th, he changed his tune, announcing on social media temporary suspension of the takeover, saying talks with China were very constructive. November 27th, Nexperia's Dutch subsidiary inexplicably counterattacked, claiming the Chinese side is not replying to dialogue, a claim immediately refuted by Nexperia China. December 2nd, he outright cancelled the China visit, turning the change of face into a serial drama. Even the EU couldn't tolerate this behavior. EU Trade Commissioner Maros Sefcovic quickly stepped in to smooth things over, saying he welcomes the China-Netherlands dialogue, effectively trying to prevent the Netherlands from dragging the entire EU into the fire. In contrast, the US strategy is much smarter. They used exemption clauses when suppressing Huawei and coordinated with Japan and South Korea when competing for critical minerals. They never charged in alone, like the Netherlands. Professor Jian Junbo of Fudan University pinpointed the key. The Netherlands' suspension of the takeover was due to two factors: the loss of the US justification and the overwhelming pressure from European automakers. Simply put, it wasn't a choice to concede, it was an inability to withstand the pressure. The Netherlands' inconsistency is essentially the contradiction of wanting to have its cake and eat it too. It wants to please the US with an anti-China stance while also protecting its interests in the Chinese market. It wants to seize corporate assets but fears the responsibility of a collapsing supply chain. This opportunistic mindset has completely eroded its international credibility. The refutation from Nexperia China and the appeal from Wingitech Technology both indicate that the Chinese side will not accept this. If the Netherlands fails to grasp the reality, it will ultimately be abandoned by global businesses and become a negative example in the era of supply chain politics. Boxing glove: the final showdown, China's firm stance, and European division. In the face of the Dutch farce, China's attitude has remained sober and firm. Minister of Commerce Wang Wentao directly pointed out, the source and responsibility for the chaos lie with the Dutch side. During talks with the EU on November 26, he explicitly demanded that the Dutch side cancel its improper intervention and allow the companies to lead the negotiations. Wingitech Technology also did not back down, filing an appeal to the highest court in the Netherlands on November 28, firmly responding that they will not relinquish legitimate control. This combination of government support and corporate rights protection has repeatedly thwarted the Netherlands' plans. Meanwhile, significant divisions have emerged within Europe. The German Association of the Automotive Industry, VDA, sent an open letter to the Dutch government, warning that they would withdraw investment if the disruption continues. The EU ambassador to China, Jorge Toledo Albanana, quickly expressed that he welcomes Chinese companies to invest in Europe. This scenario is very similar to the infighting among US allies during the Huawei crackdown. The US called for a boycott, but Deutsche Telekom insisted on using Huawei's 5G because replacing the equipment would cost billions of euros. In the face of profit, the so-called security alliance is fragile. The Netherlands wants to tie Europe to its war chariot, but its allies have already started looking out for themselves. This whole Nexperia farce has served as a global lesson. In today's deep integration of technology and industry, anyone who seeks a monopolistic fortress within a territory, or attempts to profit through forcible acquisition, will ultimately shoot themselves in the foot. The cancellation of the Dutch minister's visit is not the end. Will the Netherlands back down next? Where will the struggle for control of Nexperia go? We will continue to track these developments.